My story begins 10 years ago. I will try to tell it as best I can from my daily record notes and memory. But even with my records, it is difficult to remember life in the old world. The great destruction that ended the old world was the most tremendous change ever to occur on Earth, next to the flood of Noah's time, I guess. Looking around here now, you see a new world at peace. It's a cleansed earth, wherever you look, at peace with God. Why look back in the last decade of the old world? Well, it's a personal thing. You see, recently, my father came back. We had a happy reunion after 10 years. I actually thought at that time that I would never see him again. Father died. Many are returning from death now, but I will have to tell you more about that later. Yesterday we discussed my father's last memory of that day. I found my old record book this evening. This is the entry for that day. 20th September, hot. Called Dad. Home Depot rake. Went to Dad's garden fence. Seizure. Hospital. Late. Dad gone. It was unusually hot that day, about 95 degrees, I think. I was on vacation and went to help Dad put up a fence around his garden and other things. He had a nice home with a large backyard. The address was 2004 Pickwick Place, Jacksonville, Florida. We both remember working hard and sweating. We were just about done with the fence when I said, "It's really hot today. Let's take a break, Dad. I'm going to sit on the back porch." He said, "It's going to rain before too long. If I stop now, I may be too tired to finish." "That's okay, Dad. I'll do it. Come on and sit for a while." Dad ran his own print shop and had always pushed himself to finish every job as soon as possible. He walked slowly to the porch and sat there, with sweat running down his face. He looked at me in an impatient, overconfident smile. He knew he was pushing it, but he didn't want to stop. I said, "You look tired. Digging post holes is as much work as the garden itself." "Yeah, son, but it feels good to work hard. Most young people don't know that feeling. It'll be worth it to keep the dogs, kids, and other critters out of this garden. I'm getting some of my best vegetables ever." "That's good, Dad. This fence should last about 10 years, right?" "Maybe. I hope I can last that long." I wondered what he meant by that. He was only 62 years old. Dad laughed. Then I told him I was going in the house to get us something to drink. When I came back, Dad was not there. I looked toward the garden and saw him lying on the ground. He had had a heart seizure. I rushed to him and rushed him to the hospital, which was nearby. After a long 2 hours, the doctor told me Dad was dead. I think it was about 5 p.m., but it seemed like 10 p.m. And so that event 10 years ago changed the direction of my life, more than I knew. I think writing this will help me recount to Dad what happened since he was gone. My next entry is also significant. 25th September, Dad's funeral, 1:30. Friends, Doug. Dean Daltrey was survived by his 2 sons, Alan and Douglas. Their mother had long since divorced and remarried. The sons reside in Orange Park, Florida. So the obituary read. It rained all day of the funeral. My estranged mother came, pretending to be grieving, but she just wanted to see what she could get out of it, which was nothing. She criticized us, that is, me and my brother Doug, cruelly. She even complained that it was held on a rainy day and a Sunday. My brother was unusually cool toward me that day. His attitude toward me changed from then on, as I recall. He even said to me, "Why did you let Dad work so hard that day?" I was a little shocked by this question. Calmly I said, "It was Dad's idea. I told him to take a break." I think this was Doug's way of alleviating guilt for not spending as much time with Dad as I did. We did not spend any more time with each other than we had in the past after that. A more lonely and sad day I have never experienced. About a week later, I was telling a guy on my job about my father's death. He was an honest man that showed sincere concern for people. I guess that's why I felt comfortable telling him about it. He gave me a booklet about how to cope with death. Normally I did not read things like that, but this time I did. It was refreshing because it wasn't the same old church pitch of being saved and going to heaven. It was more practical. The dead are asleep, waiting for a resurrection, it told me. I thought it was interesting, but that was all at that time. It drastically shaped the course of my future. My brother took over my dad's business. I was helping him for a while. We could not get along, unfortunately, so I went back to my regular job of computer repair, only more hours on it. My brother Doug and I ate and visited that evening. It was the first time we had been on friendly terms since Dad's death. I remember my dad talking about the time he was in World War II and had to walk through a minefield. He lost a buddy there that day. If a bomb gets me, I hope it kills me instantly, I thought. I don't want it to just take a piece of me which can never be replaced, he told me. He also talked about how the military sometimes used groups of men as exercise subs, they called it. Or, in other words, they were guinea pigs. You know, Ellen, he told me, there are people that can't sleep unless there's a war going. It's their job to keep them going. Why, if this nation alone spent as much on peace, good things like the Peace Corps, as they did on war, we would have a very different world. This earth could be made a paradise if they all worked together for it. I had thought about his last statement a lot lately because of what I was learning from Jim. Jim was the guy on my job that gave me the book about death. He said the Bible says the earth will be a paradise in the future. I had to admire him for continuing to try to help me with the Bible. I think his concern was genuine. I was not at home many times when he came. However, a couple of times I even sat down with him and had a study. But I never attended his group's meetings. I did not like making commitments to people. Maybe that's why I never married. This day in my book seemed significant. Sunday, 11th June. Joy Convention, Praisers, Memorial Coliseum, movie. That was something I had never done before. It was my first time to attend one of these religious conventions. Admittedly, I was uncomfortable at first, but Jim made me feel so welcome. I met a lot of people there. They were all well-dressed, clean, modest, godly people. I saw no smokers, no slobs, no weirdos. I thought to myself, these are the kind of people the Bible's religion should produce. The program was strictly scriptural subjects, yet it was practical for living. I never learned so much at one meeting. One of the things that was taught was flight to safety before the Great Tribulation. But I still had my personal fears about joining them. It would mean some changes. I had always dreamed of traveling to a third world country to help the people in some way. It could be helping grow crops, teaching to read and write, or helping small business to install computers. Monday, 8th January, calls notes, left for Brazil, Rio. The company I worked for announced they were opening a facility in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. They offered a transfer package to certain employees that even included a language course. I applied and was accepted. This began to happen near the anniversary of my father's death, so it seemed like the thing for me. Doug stayed in Jacksonville and ran the print shop. He thought I was crazy for going to Brazil. For the first 5 or 6 months, I was engrossed in my new computer research project in Rio de Janeiro, but I did not forget Jim, who taught me many important truths from the Bible. I still had the books he gave me. The man who was training me on the job was a Brazilian named Javier. He promised to take me to see the Amazon River when we got some time off. This was like a dream to me. I always wanted to travel to an isolated place in a faraway land, away from cities, to see how the people lived. I guess it was kind of an explorer missionary desire. I didn't pay much attention to the news, but I remember that there were promises of making things better and of peace in many places. Monday, 15th April, Paolo for study. DC bombed. It was the first time the news had really caught my attention in a few months. A federal building in Washington, D.C. was bombed. People were killed. The opposition to the U.S. government was getting stronger. But of course, they had no plan for anything better. It was the same frustration and disappointment, but on a new, higher level. It was the futility of human government. That same day, I had my first Bible discussion with Paolo. He was of the same religion as Jim in Florida. He spoke English well, and I could use the same books as before. It was really interesting to me this time. I wanted to have a study with him every week, even though I had not accepted everything at that time. I was getting a new outlook on life. I found answers to so many questions. We discussed who God is, why we are here, why there is so much suffering, and what is in store for the future. This was giving me peace of mind in this turbulent, confused world. It also helped me to put things into perspective. There was a reason and purpose to life, and to the madness of the world. I could see that we were approaching a time of unprecedented trouble. The good side was that the Bible gives hope of a new world to replace the old one. Back to Florida for vacation. Doug, lunch. Called Jim. I wasn't sure what I would find on returning to Jacksonville for a week. Doug at least seemed to be glad I was home. We had lunch with a few of his new business contacts. Part of the conversation went like this. Doug, me and Kelly are going to a seminar in New York soon. You've got to go if you want to be up on it. Who knows, I might even stay there. Alan, you would live in New York City? Doug, why not, Al? That's where the real money is, you know? But you went to Rio. Hey, I heard their beaches are awesome. Alan, yeah, but I haven't had much time to go to the beach. I would like to visit the Amazon, though. Doug, oh yeah, I bet if you did go to the beach, you would take your Bible, right? Alan, what makes you say that, Doug? Doug, you sent me a Bible tract and said you were learning a lot from this religious group that is everywhere. The subject was abruptly changed at that point by one of Doug's friends. By the way, they were the coldest people I'd ever met. Their influence on Doug was obvious to me. 2 days later, I attended the convention of the religious group that is everywhere, which more and more appeared to be the true one. I enjoyed this one more than the one the year before. These were the kind of people I enjoyed being around. What I saw and heard that day really impressed me. It was indeed the highlight of my trip home. A later conversation with my brother revealed that he thought I was associating with fanatics. That was no surprise. I told him that they are lied about by many other religions. They are not fanatics, but dedicated people trying to put God first in their lives. Truth is more important than tradition to them. However, he only could see in the most material way. I was a weirdo to him now. That turned out to be my last visit with Doug. My hometown itself had not changed that much, except for crime and gambling casinos were on the rise. I recall a few carjackings and shootings just the week I was there. Also, there, as all over, was an intense preoccupation with sports as well as all forms of entertainment. People gave religious devotion to it, especially at that time since the Olympics. Back in Rio, Brazil, there were the same old problems of a large city in a developing country. Drugs and homeless children were high on the list. My company was doing a study of how rainforests can be preserved by looking at substitute building materials such as plastics. It seemed that everything that man was doing to save the earth, so to speak, was too little or ineffective. The more I saw what was being done worldwide to the environment and resources, people being one resource, I knew man could not fix it himself. We, as a human family, needed outside help on a global scale. Because of observing this, what I had learned from the Bible made more sense all the time. It tells of a world government, that is God's kingdom, that would soon first rid the earth of all badness. All these governments by man that have oppressed and refused to acknowledge God's sovereignty must go. All false religion must go. All the corrupt commercial systems must go. Then the earth will be clean to start again, but it will be different. The new government will be from heaven. Yes, I realized this was needed. But more importantly, I realized that it is real. Left for Manaus, Javier. Election news, earthquake. Finally, my long-awaited vacation came. Javier and me were able to use a company plane. This small plane was just right for the trip. Javier was an experienced pilot, I a novice. We made one stop from Rio to Manaus. It took about 6 hours. At last we could see the runway at the airport. At this time the presidential election was raging in the USA. Manaus was an amazing little patch of civilization on the Amazon River on the edge of the thickest jungle in the world. We were both tired and yet excited to be approaching for a landing. The wheels of the landing gear hit the runway. We were down. In the next few seconds, there was a strange vibration. It got stronger, and then we saw it. A sight that was the most frightening in my life up to that time. The ground cracked, and a huge section of the runway just sunk into the earth. Instantly, Javier accelerated the plane, and somehow we stayed airborne over the chasm. As we passed over it, gas and rocks flew up and hit the underside of the plane. We really thought we were going to crash any second, but gradually we got higher from the ground. One engine was sputtering now. It must have been damaged. The plane managed to ascend to 900 or 1,000 feet. Then we could see what was happening in all directions. It was an earthquake. By all indications, it was a major one. We looked to the city to see buildings falling, earth moving, trees shaking. It seemed to last for minutes on end. In the distance, a peak was rising out of the jungle. Lava was spewing out the top. Why, it actually looked like some prehistoric wilderness. Then the rumbling stopped. Almost the same second, the plane's engine stopped. The silence grabbed the breath from my throat. The engine started again. The tired plane was cutting out, and we were going down fast. Javier circled back to the airport, found a strip to land on, and told me to brace myself. It was an extremely rough landing. The plane spun around, and a wing cracked in two. But we were on the ground, shaken but alive. The quake was over in only 1 minute, which seemed much longer. It had stripped away our thin veneer of civilization on the surface and reduced it to rubble. Now we were alone in the jungle and unprotected. We were thankful to be alive and to have seen it from our unique perspective. Me and my partner were effectively cut off from civilization now. This old airstrip was on one side of the Amazon and the city was on the other. Bridges were out. Fires and smoke everywhere made it more dangerous. The radio in the plane was dead. Then Javier remembered a small village a few miles away. As we made our way there, the changes in the landscape became apparent. Pits were opened. A cliff stood out in the middle of the jungle. We saw a small house. Coming up to it, we could see it was only half a house. The other half was nowhere to be seen. It must have been swallowed in the earth. There was a small green snake hanging from a ceiling lamp. He claimed it and was the only inhabitant visible there. About half a mile from the half house was the village. They were not hit too hard. The people were very friendly. We stayed there. In the first weeks after the quake, the conditions were harsh. No electricity, no phones. All water had to be boiled before use. The insects and snakes were a threat. Relief supplies were slow in coming. They must have been concentrating on the large city across the river. It was about all we could do to ward off dysentery and cholera each day. It wasn't until nearly 2 weeks later that government assistance arrived. During this crisis, Javier and myself had forged a bond with these people on the other side of the Amazon from Manaus. The village was called Manazona, and it had become ours. If you have ever felt being put in a certain place at a certain time for a good reason, this was approaching how we felt. Some may call it destiny or fate, but I had learned that your individual future is not predetermined. It was certainly a more important purpose in life that I had found. I know Javier's feelings were similar because we had similar principles. But I had something more to offer those poor victims of circumstance. It was what I had learned from my Bible study. The true hope of a new world was beyond anything of human origin. This was my missionary dream that had become reality. Both Javier and myself decided to live in Manaus for work. There we were close enough to Manizona to make frequent visits. We worked well as a team. He helped me communicate with the locals in their language. I was gradually learning more Brazilian Portuguese. Even though I was far away from my original home, it seemed natural for me to be there. I did not return to Rio.